I am so excited to have Dr. Kathy Escamilla on the podcast. You are one of the legends in our field. I remember going through the master's program and then reading all of the citations that had your name in it. And then currently reading books and it has your name again. And I was interviewing someone last week, Melissa Canahan, and she was saying like, "Oh yes, Escamilla," or Dr. Laura Beth Escalante. And she wrote a book and she was talking about your si se puede, or no, your si se dice. Your,
Uh-huh.
yes, si se dice strategy. And I was like, I'm going to interview her next week. So it is
Uh,
so it's so great to have a living master, a
oh,
legend in our field to share with us. So welcome,
well,
Dr. Escamilla.
well, thank you so much. I'm honored to have a chance to talk with you.
You're so impressive. You were, I just want to name one more thing, that you were the two-time president, past president of NABE, so the National Association of Bilingual Educators. So it is so impressive. It's, or can I start off with asking, what is something that, of all your work, um, what is something that you are most proud of professionally?
Oh, that's kind of hard, but it's kind of easy also. So I take great pride every spring in seeing our undergraduate, masters, and PhD students walk across the stage and see the next generation of teachers, of researchers, of school leaders, and know what a tremendous difference they're going to make in the lives of kids. So teaching has always been something that I very much enjoyed doing, but I take great pride in watching those students walk across the stage, many of whom are first generation, many of whom didn't see themselves in college. And their parents are there busting their buttons and with pride, and it's the best. That has been a highlight of my career.
It seems like um, in the teaching field, we have teachers who are working with students directly, and then we also have professors who are teaching the new teachers. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they play such a critical and central role in our teaching field because teaching is a highly skilled profession and
Mm.
it requires research, it requires expertise, and that comes from professors like you.
Oh, thank you. But they inspire me. With what they've done, especially in the last year, with what I've seen classroom teachers do under stress, under really bad conditions that nobody created for them, a situation created for them, but to see them rise to the occasion has been really, really impressive and just resolves my faith in the profession.
I think it has changed the way people think about teachers
Mm-hmm.
generally. It's
Mm-hmm.
because they see the work that because parents usually never go to school and see the work that we're doing with our
Right.
kids,
Uh-huh.
and now they get to see as they walk past the kitchen, they're seeing their kids engage this way. You know, it's so
Yeah.
funny. People are talking about the learning loss that has occurred, and I don't think that happened at all because kids are engaging
Right.
with the teachers. Are creating
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to
Mm-hmm.
learn, and so it's just a different platform.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I would love for us to talk about two of your books. Well, the first one is Biliteracy from the Start, and then the second one we're going to talk about is Teaching Reading to English Learners. So, as the past two times president of NABE, I'd love for you to talk about why do we want to support bilingualism and biliteracy?
Oh, there's so many reasons, and we only have an hour, so I'll try to hit some of the highlights. So more people in the world are bilingual than are monolingual, and the United States, for all of our gifts and all of the advantages of living here, has short sighted in one really important way, and that is that we have never required our students to become bilingual. And to be globally competitive in the 21st century, to be a citizen of the world, to advocate for peace and justice, one has to know more than one language. So there are lots of good reasons to be bilingual that researchers have said it's good for an individual, it's good for a community, and it's good for a nation. So when kids come to school with a resource, which is a language other than English,
Right.
what a wasted resource if we don't develop that as we are adding on English, the argument is not one that's against the teaching of English. That's what bilingual means, knowing more than one. But the sad thing is that so many of our kids who come to school speaking a language other than English leave school only knowing English, or having only had the opportunity to develop literacy in one language. And it's a wasted resource. It's a wasted national resource.
I feel like I have to go through a confessional because I feel like when I started my language specialist in my position, I would have kids who were bilingual, and then by the time they graduate, they become monolingual.
Yes.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
so sad. And I realized like I have so much to learn from my bilingual educators because really we're not in the position or the profession to transition kids out of their home language into another.
That shouldn't be our goal. Yeah,
Exactly.
our goal should be adding on to what they bring. One of the, that people for you mentioned the whole idea of learning loss, and one of the things that we think happened that was actually advantageous during the pandemic was that kids who stayed home continued, kids who didn't speak English who stayed home continued to get input from parents who spoke non-English languages. And so the opportunities for language maintenance were probably enhanced by the fact that we had to do so much online learning.
Right.
Now, I wouldn't wish a pandemic on anyone, but we do know that that the parents have resources and they have funds of knowledge, and that the kids had more access to them.
Yes. And that's why when we are allowing kids or supporting kids to continue to be bilingual, they involve their family. This is a bridge to the family. Right?
Absolutely.
This is a way to engage the family because it's. I think if I had a bilingual education when, let's say, Vietnamese American,
Uh-huh.
Vietnamese English, because I'm American, my mom always felt like there was a distance between her and the education
Sure.
system, right? And that was not of anyone's fault. But if I was attending a bilingual Vietnamese school, my mom would be much more involved in that,
Yeah.
and so
Hmm.
it's a gift.
Yep.
You talked about the individual, society, and a nation. Would you run through that a little bit more and talk about?
Okay, so the advantages of being
Yes.
bilingual. So for an individual, we know there are cognitive and academic advantages. So there's a phenomena called cognitive flexibility, that is sort of like you're, you have one arm is better than two languages is better than one. So it's a mental, it's not a mental issue. I don't mean it like that. I'm not fully awake this morning, I guess. It's a cognitive advantage in terms of all kinds of things. Cognitive flexibility. Bilinguals, individuals who are learning two languages, have two ways of interacting with the world. They have two conceptual ways to express one thing. So you see a chair, instead of just being locked in knowing it's a chair, but it's also a silla. So that gives you sort of a double take on one phenomena. So that's good for the individual. For a community, we know that, especially in the United States, people constantly arrive, and there's a constant interaction of languages and cultures. And so in any community, there is more vitality when languages are welcomed. And when people move into a community, what do we need? We need bilingual people for what? Law, education, the medical profession. Can you imagine during the pandemic what would have happened if we did not have people who could speak Vietnamese and Spanish and Chinese and Korean and Arabic in the hospitals dealing with families? So that's advantageous to a community and to our nation. If we are going to position ourselves to be leaders in efforts toward world peace, we have to understand more than just our own realities. And we can't, and we shouldn't depend on interpreters and translators. We should have some firsthand ability to understand the world beyond our own little myopic spaces.
Yes, it's so. I love how you talked about the like multiple circles. I feel like as you're
Yeah.
talking, I see like the like it's kind of like the strategy of text to self,
Yeah. Uh-huh. To
text to text, text to world,
uh-huh.
right? And it's very
Yes.
similar, or very similar to Dr. Redeem Sims Bishop. She talked about
Uh-huh.
mirrors, sliding glass doors,
Uh-huh.
and windows into worlds. And so
Hmm.
language is like that. So
Languages like that too.
yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So when we can read for your book, Biliteracy from the Start, what are the practices and framework for biliteracy?
Okay, so one of the frameworks for biliteracy is that we have to equalize the status of languages. We can't just be doing, and the book is about Spanish and Spanish speakers because that's the work that I've done, and those are the schools that I've taught in, and the kids with whom I've had the honor to interact over the years. But first about language status. That first of all, biliteracy is a higher form of literacy than monoliteracy. Is a higher form of literacy. And so we tend to privilege, monolingual English, particularly high stakes test scores, as being the coin of the realm, when in fact we ought to be understanding that kids who can read in two languages are kids who have some advantages over kids who can only read in one. So that requires an equalization of the status of languages. So in our framework, we always put English and Spanish side by side. We don't put one on top of the other one. The goal of the program is biliteracy, not transition to English. So that's our framework. In our framework, we have four equal but equally important aspects. One is oracy, and that is the oral language that you need to be successful in reading. Oral language in many US literacy programs is undervalued. It is greatly undervalued, and yet it plays such an important part. Kids who are highly verbal and have a good vocabulary and good sentence structures and good ability to interact with people likely to become better readers. And yet we kind of undervalue that. But the research is now developing. It's on our side. Reading, of course, and writing. Writing has also been undervalued in US schools, particularly in beginning literacy programs, that we think kids have to read before they can write. And that's not true. The two can go on simultaneously. And then metalinguistic development, which is the cognitive development. It's learning what language is about. It's learning how languages work, how Spanish works in ways that's the same as English, and how it works in ways that is different than English. So our framework has those four components in both Spanish and English. An important part of our framework says that we also need to help children connect their two languages.
Yes.
And that's important for them to not see them as separate and not one having nothing to do with the other one. Previous generations, unfortunately, had learned that their native languages had no place in school, that they were of no benefit to learning, and that kids needed to switch off their Spanish language when they came into the classroom because it was English time and Spanish was just going to interfere, get in the way. Our framework says absolutely not, that the languages reinforce each other if given an opportunity to develop both of them simultaneously.
Yeah, how did we? I remember that as well when I was a kid. It was English only in school, and then I
Uh-huh.
still go around the world and I still around the schools and I still see English only signs around.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what would you say to a school district or teachers who have those signs up or who have those practices of linguistic imperialism?
Take it down. Yeah, I mean, even if well intentioned,
Yes.
it's hurtful.
Yes.
What do you say when you say English here in school? Well, school is a place of high status among most of our language minority families in this country. And if the school says English only, what are they not saying? They're not saying your language, your culture, your parents, your grandparents don't have as much status, aren't as valuable as those who speak English. And that is not the right message to send to kids.
Right.
And it won't help learn English. I mean, all of our research shows us that mostly English only programs, while they teach kids to speak English, they usually result in language loss. And they don't, when you compare them to well implemented, well funded bilingual programs, they don't stack up. The bilingual programs win every single time. So,
It really is true. When I started learning Lao, I
uh,
went back and I couldn't pull my Spanish out to help me, and I couldn't pull English because the grammar structures are so different. So I went and pulled, like I didn't intentionally did this, but I thought about how is this said in Lao, how is this said in Vietnamese, right?
mm-hmm.
And then when I started learning Thai, I was like, oh, how is this said in Lao? Oh. And
Yes.
so it's like one language goes to the next and really builds on the next.
Language is a resource.
Yes,
Language,
language.
any kind of language
Right.
is a
Right.
resource.
And you also said language is school is a political act, right? And
Yeah.
so Dr. Cummings said that when we have kids leave their home languages at home, we also have the kid leave them at home. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm not saying that correctly, but it's the concept of when kids' home languages are not welcomed at school, then their cultures are not welcomed at school.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
And in the end, there is an internalization by kids,
absolutely.
right? Because they see themselves, they see their family as less than because they're not
Yeah,
welcomed,
absolutely.
right?
Uh-huh.
So it's really more like it's a biliteracy and bilingualism is as much as a social action, a social justice, as well as an educational movement.
Hmm. Absolutely, an educational movement, and it comes as no threat to English, which is the political part of it. I think that at times there's just ignorance. There are really well-meaning people that think that by telling a kid just turn off your Spanish channel and turn on the English channel, that's in fact going to help them to learn English quicker. We know that isn't true. So I'm giving them credit for being well-intentioned. But then there are people who are just flat out thinking that to speak English is you can't be an American if you don't speak English,
Right.
and that isn't true.
Right. We have a lot of work left with us to
Yes,
do,
we do.
but we'll get there
Yes, we
slowly and
do. Yeah,
slowly.
yeah,
What
yeah.
do they say? They say history leans on the side of justice.
We hope. Yeah.
Can we talk about what are the things teachers can do to support really young kids
Hmm.
to be biliterate and bilingual?
Yes. Well, so the first thing, of course, is to have a well defined, well structured, well implemented program where kids have the opportunity to learn to read and write in both of their languages in school, in the formal setting. And, but that isn't always true. In fact, about 80% of the kids in the country who come to school speaking non English languages are in English medium programs. They're in schools where they only have an opportunity to learn English.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that we can't support the heritage languages of those children. So, one of the ways that we can do that is by absolutely encouraging their parents to keep using that non English language at home. And one of the things parents frequently tell us that they're afraid that by using their first language with kids, that's somehow going to confuse kids, that's going to slow them down in school, that's going to impede their progress in English. Nothing is further from the truth. So we need to tell them, if my job is to teach English, your job is to help me by continuing to speak Vietnamese at home. And it's not just so important that you talk to your kids in your language, but that you demand that they respond to you in the language. Because very, very quickly, what happens is that parents keep on talking in Spanish or Vietnamese or whatever, the children answer in English. Everybody's fine because the parents think the children are bilingual. The children are fine because their parents are so happy they're learning English, and nobody's any wiser until along comes high school and you ask the kids, how do you say this in Vietnamese? Well, they understand it, but they don't know how to say it in Vietnamese. So we have to help parents understand that production is the skill that's going to enable them to maintain the language. And that is also the cognitive skill that's going to help kids learn to read and
Yes.
write in
Oh,
English. And it's so hard. I mean, I raised 2 kids and I have 4 grandkids now, and it's very hard because they're very lazy. They're not lazy, they're cute, but when given the chance, they will always respond in English.
right.
Yeah, always. So we have to reinforce to parents that it's okay. The second thing we have to do is to tell parents, your parents, that just because you don't speak English doesn't mean you're not adults. And so we frequently see that the kids that do the best in school are the kids whose parents maintain some of the parenting skills that come from their home countries. They demand that their kids respect teachers. They demand that they try hard in school. They demand that they show up ready to learn. And we can tell parents, you can do that in any language. Do not turn over those responsibilities to your kids, because too often we see 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, although it's illegal, translating at parent teacher conferences and interpreting, doing adult things. And we hear people telling parents, well, that's not the way we do it here. How you have to do, I mean, short of physical abuse and things like that, there are many parenting strategies that are quite effective culturally, that I think we need to encourage people to maintain and keep and and um, and not lose.
I, there's so many things I want to say. Well, first of all, I'll talk about the homeland, well, the parenting.
Uh-huh.
There are multiple ways to parent, right?
Hmm.
And we can't have school impose one culture of parenting on families. And that's what I learned from Dr. Maria Pena. And she said, when we see a different way of parenting, we affirm it and we support it. And then
Yep.
parents feel that they can engage with the school more because the school is like, oh, yeah, this is the way you do it. Yes,
Sure.
continue. Right.
Yeah, continue,
Right.
especially if they can help us by being parents,
Right.
by being good parents in the
Right.
best way that they know how to do that.
Right. I think you struck a chord with me because right now I'm currently with my sister, and this summer with my mom, and all three of the adults are speaking Vietnamese to each other and the kids,
Ah,
but
nice.
the kids are only responding
In
in
English.
English, right? And I look at my nephew who's 32, and he has a great relationship with me and my sister because we speak English to him. Yet he has a very fragmented relationship with my mom, his grandmother, because he can hear her and understand her fully in Vietnamese, but the production hurts because
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
hasn't been able to produce Vietnamese for many years, and so he doesn't have a relationship with grandmother anymore, right?
Isn't that sad?
And this is
Yeah.
so sad. This is
And
what
that's
happened,
so
right?
that's a story that can be told millions of times in this country.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is why parents are so important. Dr. Jim Cummings said parents can read to kids at home. They can
Hmm.
tell stories
Hmm.
of what's happening. And I said, "Hey, my mom had only a third grade education. What can she do?" And he said, "She can do so much. She can tell
Hmm.
stories of her childhood. She
Hmm.
can tell fables. She can
Hmm.
narrate what she's doing at work. She can talk
Uh-huh.
about things that from her past. And by doing that, you understand the culture. But by also doing that, you also have another language schema to add,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And
And some of these stories go untold. I mean, just parents sometimes want to spare their kids because they think it will be painful. But kids want to know, how'd you get here? When'd you get here? How'd you meet dad? What was hard about it? What was easy about it? And sometimes parents feel that they can't share that with their kids. But by doing so, that develops oracy, that develops ability to express oneself using the schemata, like you said, of the native language. And then when you bring that over to English, then you've got two ways of creating conversation and two ways of thinking about the world.
right, right. I'm currently binge watching Dr. Krashen's webinars, and
Oh,
he always talks about
uh-huh,
comprehensible input, but he's
uh-huh.
kind of saying, don't worry about comprehensible output, or don't worry about output. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So you have kids like my niece and my nephew who have comprehensible input. They understand Vietnamese, but they don't have output.
Right.
And that's really a struggle.
I think it is too. And I think that's, well, yeah, I think that's a little bit outdated, the
Yeah,
way of the
no
way of
comment.
thinking about second language acquisition.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So now that can you before we go on to talking about what teachers can do to support biliteracy in early years of really little kids. By the way, if you're an elementary school kid teacher, I just want to applaud you because it is so difficult to teach. I
It
taught
is.
2 years in the fifth grade, and I was like, I have a new respect for colleagues in the elementary school.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you teach in elementary school? Is that
I
what?
did.
That's
Yes.
why.
Yeah. Yeah. I taught first grade for 2 years. I taught fifth grade. And then I was a reading resource teacher. So I taught every grade, but I, was like wasn't called interventionist then. That's what it would be called now. Yeah.
It's tough, isn't it? Being an
It's
elementary
very
school.
hard work. It's
Right.
very, very
Very
hard
hard.
work. But I taught in schools always with newly arrived immigrants. And I would not trade that experience for anything. The children were the best behaved kids that I ever had the privilege of working with. The parents were the most thoughtful, kind, wanted the best for their kids. Economically didn't have much, but had aspirations for their kids and expected their kids to come to school and try their best. And well, I wouldn't trade that for middle class English speaking kids and all of their issues and the ways they challenge teachers. I was very lucky.
We are. we always hear stories about language specialists who say, "Oh my goodness, it is hard, but the joy that the kids bring,
Mhm.
the kids grow so fast, so quickly,
Uh-huh.
and they have such a love because they come from cultures where education is the path to success."
And they try so hard. And sometimes when they make a mistake, they make a logical connection, and it's just absolutely hilarious. And they don't even know what that, but they're trying so hard, and they're just so full of
So
joy.
cute. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like you have because of your elementary school experience and working with parents as a bilingual. What practices did you notice that parents did that was really effective?
Um, oh, okay, that's a good. So one of the things, the respect for the teacher, and the respect for the school. That school isn't a place where you go and mess around. That you're lucky to be able to. I mean, so those messages,
Right.
the message of school's a serious place. You go there, you try. We expect you to represent not just yourself as an individual, but your family.
Right.
If you let us down, you're disappointing the family. I mean, some people say, "Oh God, what a heavy guilt trip that is to play on kids." I didn't see any of my kids that I taught. I didn't think that they were psychologically badly affected by any of those messages, but they certainly realized that they weren't the center of the universe. And I do think that that is the mistake that too many of our middle class English speaking dominant culture people, everything revolves around the child. And so the child doesn't learn to interact in a positive way, a cooperative way with their community, and aren't open to being part of a group where you're not the star of the show. And those are pretty broad generalizations, but those are my observations.
Right. You're talking about mindsets. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we want to have kids. Like, what parents can do is send kids who want to learn and
yeah.
have a respect for learning, because then
Uh-huh.
that's a lot of the work already. Right?
And parents can, the parents that I taught, if I said they don't have to have their own bedroom to do a homework or anything like that. Just provide a place at the kitchen table, and say, okay, 5 o'clock every day, you got homework to do, sit down and do it. And most often, parents were very happy to listen to what the school said and ask them to do, as long as it was something they saw that they could do. I mean,
Right.
sometimes we ask ridiculous things of parents. Like I said, parents can help by encouraging their children to speak to them in their native language.
Yes.
Parents can help by, if they can't read in English, that's fine. If they can't read at all, that's fine. Have your children read to you. Because that practice is important for your children. Have your children read to you and then tell you what it is that they have read. Don't just let them read the words, but ask them, so what does that mean? Tell me. A very important crossover strategy is you can say, okay, you read it to me in English. Tell me what you just read in Vietnamese, because that's así se dice. That's when we get to building cognitive flexibility. And one of the ways that we do that is by encouraging kids to take what they know in one language and to put it in the other language.
Right. It's continuing to use both languages and to merge them
Yep.
together.
And
It's
all
great.
of that can be done by parents at home
Right.
who have little education and not a lot of economic
Right.
means.
What I'm hearing is you're saying that schools need to see the assets that parents have, even if they can't read, even if they're not literate in
Mm-hmm.
their home languages. That's fine, because they can do
Mm-hmm.
so much with the mindset, with just having kids participate, to share
Mm-hmm.
what the kids are doing at school.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about now school. What can teachers do to develop biliteracy at an early age?
Well, I wish that when I was teaching, I would have had the internet, because you can have books in all kinds of languages in your classroom, even if you're not doing a formal education program. There's no reason. And now with the internet, my gosh, we have access to resources in many languages at our fingertips. So there is no reason why we can't encourage kids to look at videos, to read books, to know about their cultures and other cultures, because like I said, we have the world at our fingertips
Yes.
in schools. So I would make time, no matter if I had 10 languages in my classroom, I would have 30 minutes a day where I would allow kids to do something in their home language as a way of saying, your language is valuable in this classroom. I would give them time to share with other kids in the class. Oh, so what did you learn when you read that book? Tell us about that. Again, learned about it in their language. They're telling us about it in English. That's an important part of metalinguistic development, which is a part of our framework for biliteracy. So we make time. Teachers have an obligation. And I think that as native English speakers, sometimes we forget, and this is the value of knowing more than one language, is that you realize how idiomatic expressions and things like that just totally trip you up. So, when we say we're interested, no, thank you, I'm not interested means I don't want to buy your product. No, thank you, I'm not interesting means something else totally different. And so those are the kind of things that I think good teachers need to be aware of, that are, as our kids are coming into English, they frequently don't understand the difference. I used an example of a teacher who says, okay, friends, what we're going to do is clap the number of sounds in the word sofa. Now, that sounds simple enough, but you can't just understand what you're supposed to do. You have to break down a sentence like that. So, okay, friends means the teacher's trying to get my attention. Okay, how many? We're going to clap. What does that mean? Well, it means put two hands together. The number of sounds. Well, that means a word is broken down into sound units. All of that is something that a native English speaking child does not have to have broken down for them. But kids coming into school being non-English speakers teachers need to break down their language and understand what it is that they're asking kids to do. And by doing so, they can be better teachers of English.
Right.
Too often, and again, I think especially a lot of our young teachers, they really want to know. They want to do well by kids. These are not, you don't go into teaching because you're a mean person, but sometimes you just know, we just assume things. We assume that kids understand things like, okay, friends, or, all the ways that we learned in teacher education, that you should never directly talk to kids, especially when you're managing a classroom. So you don't say, sit down and shut up. That would be wrong. So you say, I like the way that Stephanie's listening, which means sit down and shut up. But kids who don't understand that that is code for a classroom management strategy may keep on doing stuff. Like a kid told me, I learned this actually from a kid in school who I said, Jose, the teacher is talking to you. No, she's not talking to me. And his interpretation is, when she's ready for me to sit down, she'll tell me. Every day, the teacher thought, well, Jose is the last one to sit down, the last one to pay attention. I always have to put his name on the board. He didn't think he was being disrespectful. He didn't understand the code. So I think that it's incumbent upon our teachers to understand how language needs to be broken down and communicated so that the message is understood mutually.
Right. I remember.
And I do think they're open to that. I don't think that teachers are closed-minded at all about that.
Right. I remember a podcast about NPR called Lost in Translation, and this researcher put all of these speakers of English who are non-native speakers in a room, and they were understanding each other fully. Then all of a sudden they put an English native speaker in the room, and all of a sudden the comprehension went down, and they started transcribing what the person said, and it was full of idiomatic expressions. Right. And then these people who were understanding fully before, now their comprehension has drastically been reduced. Right? And so, thank you for sharing about.
And that's a wonderful example, because we do tend to talk in code, and I think they say Americans are the worst. So. Americans.
I can see that, because our language is flowery, and that happens sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Can you talk about, so we talked about oracy right there. Can you talk about reading, and then let's go to writing afterwards?
Okay. So the foundation of reading in my mind is meaning. If we only teach kids to decode words so that they can understand them better and read with more fluency so that they can understand better. I am very, very worried about reading movements in the United States that are so heavily focused on decoding words that kids don't get a chance to really learn to comprehend. Let's put it this way. We've had several metalinguistic studies about second language kids in this country. Unfortunately, the most recent one's about 15 years old now, and it was August and Shanahan. But one of the things that they found were that kids who come to school speaking a non-English language and are learning English as a second language learn to decode as efficiently and quickly as native English speaking kids. When they get to the 5th grade, the thing that slows them down is comprehension and writing. And so it's not that they're not learning how to break down words, or they're not learning sounds or the names of letters, but they're becoming very good decoders without understanding or an ability to interact with text. And when you can interact with text, then you can interpret what the text message is. And so I'm really, really worried about the current direction of people who claim that we have a science of reading and it applies equally to non-English speakers as well as to English speakers. That is not true. That doesn't seem to be true. And I'm very fearful for what that will do to the teaching of reading. So yes, do kids need to learn how to decode words in English? Absolutely, they do. But meaning is the reason that we teach kids to read.
Right. I remember I was reading the science of reading and I put it on Twitter, and then someone in the comments said we have to be really careful about applying data that was done on a group of monolinguals and apply that to a group of multilinguals.
Yeah, without examination. Yeah. That's a validity issue, and psychometricians have said that forever, that no test or assessment or intervention is valid if it's applied to a group of students for whom it was not intended. And that's what we've got going here, plus a misapplication of the whole word science, but that's another conversation.
And the funny part of that Twitter message, someone said, please talk to Dr. Escamilla about that.
Oh,
and that's why I emailed you. And I was like, okay, I will, because you're a renowned expert on bilingualism. So. Can you talk about, so let's move from, so how do we create meaning then? After we learn how to decode.
So in other countries, so that one of the things I was going to say is, if we're going to do biliteracy and do it well, we have to be respectful of the internal structures of the languages that we're using. And that means that our reading instruction in Spanish shouldn't be English translated into Spanish. It should be taking a look at how Spanish is taught in countries where Spanish is the national language. What are the methods used there? And that's the methodology and the pedagogy of authenticity that we need to be applying here. So in Mexico, where kids start learning, it's not that they don't learn to decode, they do, but they start by learning words as a whole, because words are the unit of meaning. And then so they start with kids' names. So we have a kid in our class, her name is Jocelyn. Okay, Jocelyn, we can say Jocelyn lives in Puebla. Okay, words can be made into sentences. Jocelyn is made up of Jocelyn, 3 syllables. Okay, three syllables. Jocelyn is made up of 5, 6 letters. I don't know how, depends on how you might want to spell Jocelyn. I should have picked Jose, or an easier name. So with a word, you can break it down into words, into letters, sounds, and syllables, or you can take the word and build on it to sentences, paragraphs, and stories. But the word is the unit of instruction that we start with, not letters, not especially not letter names, and not letter sounds. That is different than English pedagogy. Right. But what we see in too many programs in the United States is English methodology that has been translated into Spanish because we want something parallel. We don't want something authentic. We want English and Spanish to look just alike, even though they're 2 very different languages. Now, can you imagine what they're trying to deal with in Mandarin English programs using this? How in the world does reading instruction happen unless it's authentic to the language?
I feel like I want that shirt that says, like, words carry meaning. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So,
words are the units of meaning, and
right.
So you don't the purpose for learning to read is not so you read fast, and it's not so you can decode unknown words. It's so that you can derive meaning from what you're reading.
Right. So what would you say about independent reading then?
About independent reading, I like it. I do it. I mean, I read a lot independently. We do know that children who are engaged and motivated and like to read become better readers than kids who don't who can read but don't like to.
Yes.
So that said, however, I am not a big fan of taking kids who are beginning in their acquisition of English and setting them in a corner and telling them to read for pleasure for 20 minutes. If someone did that to me in Russian, I think I'd sit there quietly. I was always a quiet student, but I think I'd be daydreaming. I'm not sure. So there is value to it, but not equal value to everyone. We really have to understand where students are in their acquisition of a particular language.
Right. So now that this goes to the talk about balanced literacy.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you talk about that then?
About balance. Okay, so there's an old adage in Spanish that says, "No hay mal libro en manos de buena maestra."
Oh, beautiful.
And
There are no
I've
bad
always
books.
loved that. So there are no bad books in the hands of a good teacher. Okay, so what I think happens in the United States, and I've lived through several of these reading wars,
Yes.
is that every decade or so we decide everything we're doing is rotten and we got to throw it all out. And then we got to replace it with something. But as we replace it with policy, we never enact the policies in ways that make sense to teachers or that teachers fully have a chance to learn and try out. So what you see implemented in schools is sort of the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month or the flavor of the year. So we never had complete implementation of something called whole language, whatever that was. We've never had complete implementation of balanced reading programs, however anyone defines them. And unless we do something drastically different, we likely won't have complete implementation of this movement toward phonics early and often, as everyone's trying to do. So consistency and fidelity to any particular reading approach is probably as important as whatever approach you are using. Now, I have my opinions about the limitations of approaches that don't see reading and writing as ways that reading as ways that we interact with text and derive meaning, and writing as ways that we learn to express ourselves in a variety of ways and for a variety of purposes, depending on the content and what we're being asked to do.
Right. That's I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so like I'm saying, our problem in the US is that we never really have had a pedagogy. We have programs and we have movements and we have policies that kind of never fully get implemented, but then we do something that says, well, this isn't working, and we have never been child focused. And this is kind of a political statement, but you can take it or leave it or cut it out. But because our goals have always been about keeping the US number one in the world, whatever that means, and not about teaching children to fully develop their own potential.
It's sad that, but it's amazing that you said that, like you pointed that out to us to say, like, this is the reality, right? We're trying to be number one, but we forget about what's really important for kids.
Yeah. And number one at what? I mean,
You talked about so I'm thinking, I think there are a lot of teachers who are applauding right now, talking about the movement away from phonics early and often to saying, like, there is a space and there's a time for phonics. Like I guess your example of putting you in a Russian school and having you read in the back would not help you, right? That's the point when you need phonics instruction, but that cannot be the only reading diet that students have.
No. It can be, at most, it should be about 20 minutes a day in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. Yeah. I mean, there is a place for it. And in our framework, we have phonics in both reading and writing, because actually in Mexico, when they teach kids to decode, they use a method called dictado. And they have children the teacher dictates a sentence and the children write sentences. And from that, teachers can see how children can decode words, because they have to hear sounds in their head and record the sounds on a page. So it's not just through reading that we can teach phonics, it's through writing. So we are suggesting that maybe 10% of writing instruction and 25% of reading instruction be decoding. But then the rest of the time be devoted to oracy, to the development of metalinguistics, to different kinds of writing, and reading absolutely with an emphasis on comprehension.
Right. I have to.
That's a broader view.
I have to applaud you, because this is the second time you're the first person I've interviewed that has talked about pedagogy in another country. Because you talked about Mexico. You talked about, well, we're gonna have Spanish speaking kids in America use a monolingual program to teach them. Why not? Let's learn about how they do it in Mexico or in South America. And so
in South America,
right,
Central and South America, right.
And so I was like, yay, this is great. I guess this is the part of like the social justice movement of saying, like, there are other countries and other regions in the world. They also know how to teach their kids. Let's learn from them.
They have a pretty good history of teaching kids to read and write.
Right. I have two more questions. Can we talk about, you talked about metalinguistic often, so we can talk about that, and then we'll end with the podcast with writing. We'll have to reschedule another time to talk about teaching readings to English learners, if that's possible, because this has been such a rich conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you talk about metalinguistic awareness and practices?
Yeah, so metalinguistics is basically learning about how language works. And so in biliteracy programs, we have to learn both how our language works, so that's with how our language works within language and across languages. So within language, in Spanish, one of the things I got to learn is gender agreement. Yes. That there's an el and a la and a los and a las. So there's masculine, feminine, singular, and plural. In English, we got the, a, and an. So within language, I have to learn. In Spanish, there's gender agreement. That's really important. In English, it's the, a, and an, and it's not so important. But either way, I have learned both within and across language differences. That's metalinguistic development. I have to learn things like the adjective generally comes after a noun in Spanish, but before a noun in English. I have to learn that the title of a book in English is all the first letters of important words in a title, but in Spanish is just the first word of a title. Right. So within language, I have to learn how titles are formed, and then across languages, I have to learn similarities and differences. Right. So that's meta language. But language also works in a different. So that's, I mean, those are obvious things. Those are things we would do in elementary school, but those are things that serve us well in life, because if we try to do things like translate literally idiomatic expressions, they don't make any sense. I mean, so we can do it, but people, what are you talking about? So you don't use the same words to say the same thing. So right. First of all, I have to, within my language, I have to say, what does it mean to say, don't judge a book by its cover? Okay, that I have to understand what that means. That means what's on the outside is not always what's on the inside. What am I doing when I'm doing that? I'm developing metalinguistic awareness. These are other ways of saying that same thing that my mother said, don't judge a book by its cover, a million times, but now I'm learning deeper meanings of it. I'm learning what it really means. So if I want to tell my mother-in-law, who only spoke Spanish, if I want to say that to her, I can't just say that because she won't understand what it means. I have to think about what is a similar way to say it in Spanish. So metalinguistic awareness has to do with how do I express myself? How do I interpret meaning? Because the words are different across languages, not just that they're different languages, it's that they express different things in different ways across languages.
Right. And when we have this metalinguistic awareness, that's when one language can support the other.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And this is why we say
that's the fun of it is interpreting what it says. So one day, just to give you an example, I have a ton of Facebook friends, and I love it because when we put things on Facebook, then I'll always hear from my friends from Venezuela or Colombia. My grandson lost his two teeth at the same time about a year ago. And so I said, look at Elias. We now have an official molacho in my family. Molacho is the Mexican word for toothless, which you apply to little kids. So all of a sudden I hear in Colombia, we say this, in Venezuela, we say this, in Puerto Rico, we say this. What a wonderful inadvertent, not intended lesson in meta language, which is even within language,
Right.
there's a lot of different ways of expressing the same phenomena. Okay, so how do we say that in English? We call kids toothless wonders and things like that. But so how would you say that in English? But it's not the same as in Spanish.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that in Vietnamese, and we wouldn't have that either. But the fact
Yeah.
that you have explained that to me, that there is a word for toothless
Uh-huh.
in Spanish, and then there's in Venezuela, it's something, in Guatemala, it's something else.
Yeah.
It made me think,
I
oh,
didn't even know it was going to create that kind of a conversation.
right,
That's what was so
yes,
fun, is that people were like, oh, yeah, oh, is that what you say? Is that how you say it? Well, this is the way we say it. Now, the reason that it works is if I don't say, yeah, but the Spanish is the correct one in Mexico, the Mexican Spanish is the right one. No, it's like, oh, isn't that interesting? What are different ways to, what are other ways to do that? Is that I don't put a value judgment. And too often we say, well, now the standard way to say that would be.
right,
So, I allow the metalinguistic development to come without judging.
right. It's kind of like in interconnected, because one of the first principles of your framework is that there's no language hierarchy,
Right,
right? And so it's
right,
not just like, not the Castilian Spanish
right.
that is superior compared to
Uh-huh,
Cuban Spanish,
uh-huh,
right? Or Central
right,
American Spanish. It's
right,
right.
uh-huh,
It's just a different way of Spanish,
uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
So that's really. Let's end with talking about writing for a little bit. So we talked about a lot about reading. I'm just loving this conversation. You were just amazing.
Thank
Don't
you.
retire. Come back and teach us
Oh,
all.
well, there are a lot of up and coming rising stars we can
Yeah.
learn from.
Um, can you tell us about writing and biliteracy?
Yes. So writing is something that we don't wait until kids can read. It's something that we start doing in kindergarten. It's something that we start doing in both languages. It's not something that we tell kids they can't do. So the 4-year-old kid who's writing a letter to Santa will go on and 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 on. May not be decipherable, may not be something we can read, but if we ask them to read it, they'll read, "Dear Santa, please bring me a truck, a train, blah, blah, blah." They won't remember it tomorrow, but they won't tell you they can't write. By the middle of kindergarten, kids will say, "Oh, I can't write," because they've been told they
Right,
can't write.
right,
So writing needs to happen. Writing and reading need to happen together.
right.
They mutually reinforce each other. We can't privilege reading over writing. Writing can help reading. Reading can help writing. They're mutually reinforcing. And Spanish, contrary to popular belief, is not easier to learn to write than English, even though it has a transparent orthographic system. There are lots of little tricks in Spanish, like accents, like silent H's, like soft C's and hard C's. So there are lots of little tricks that make it equally challenging for kids to learn. So we can teach kids. We also need to teach writing with direct and explicit instruction.
Yes.
We can't just give a kid a pencil and say, write, and then say, well, you did it wrong. So in Literacy Squared, writing starts the same day as reading does, the first day of kindergarten. We teach kids to write their name. We teach them to write the date. We teach them how the date is different when you're expressing it in numbers between Spanish and English. Metalinguistic development. We do it regularly. We do it repeatedly. We have consistency. We do writing in the content areas. We do writing in language arts. But it's critically important. We do shared writing. We do collaborative writing. We do independent writing. But we encourage writing, and we give it equal amount of time. 25% of our time in the reading block is devoted to writing. In the literacy block is devoted to writing.
So you're saying, I envision in this, it's like we might, in the beginning, we might talk about a book or like the theme of a book, right? Let's talk about farm animals. So the kids might talk about farm animals in Spanish, in English, with a partner. So that's the oracy part. Then we'll go read the book together, right? There might be a lot of talking about it in Spanish and English. And then we'll go write about it. or write about when we went to when was a time when we saw an animal that, or we could do another prompt, of course, but it's about writing about what we just saw, what we just read, and so
Mhm.
that's the integrated part,
Right, right.
right? So how do we do like bilingual writing then?
So generally in the
Yes.
Literacy Squared program, we have
Yes.
encouraged teachers to develop writing in Spanish and writing in English. However, just the example that you mentioned is the perfect way, the perfect segue into talking about translanguaging. So we come back from a field trip to the zoo and we're writing about what we saw, right? And we're encouraging kids to write in Spanish about what we saw at the zoo. But the fact is, we went into the aquarium at the zoo, and the kid read on the little gold thing at the bottom of the jellyfish tank, jellyfish. So they come back and they write Vimos jellyfish. And we would not correct, we would not change. We would say, okay, here's a kid who knows about bilingual living,
Yes.
because that's what kids in the US do. We're asking them to write about it in Spanish, but they're writing about a phenomena they lived in English. And
Yes.
so if they need to do that in two languages, that becomes the bilingual writing, and we don't change that.
Right. Because then it's we don't want to correct it. We want to say, oh, this is how. Oh yeah,
Right.
vemos
Yeah.
no vemos jellyfish, but
Uh-huh.
we
Vimos.
added right vimos jellyfish. Sorry, we
Uh-huh.
see, and then we would see jellyfish, but the kids would know that in jellyfish in English. Then we would eventually add jellyfish in Spanish. We would
Right.
say right.
Right. Uh-huh.
We
Yeah.
would say, oh yes, you have the vimos,
Uh-huh.
and then jellyfish. Now let's add, like, there's no correcting. I just want to show you that this is another way of saying it. So now you have both the word jellyfish in Spanish and
Right.
jellyfish in English.
In English.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Yay. Well, I want to end this. There's so much. I can't believe an hour went by. I'm just, and
It
this
was
one
quick.
book was quick. I feel like there's a program you have called S Squared, Literacy S Squared. And so I think it's in your book. Teachers are going to have to get it. It's so great. I'm gonna end. I always end the podcast with red light, yellow light, and a green light. So it's a metaphor for teachers. So red light is something you ask teachers to stop doing. Yellow light is something that you ask students to start doing, and then a green light is something you ask them to continue doing. Just like we continue on a green light, when we see a
Uh-huh.
yellow light, we start to slow down, and then red light we stop.
So what do I want teachers to stop doing?
Yeah, so we'll do all
Okay.
three. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So to stop doing would be to insist on language separation in bilingual programs. We do want to develop codes in Spanish and codes in English, but we do not want to discourage translanguaging because that helps develop both of the languages.
Yes.
So stop insisting that every time a child says something like vimos jellyfish, that we say jellyfish no es una palabra en español. ¿Cómo se dice en español? That we stop correcting that kind of language because that is so natural in the United States. And it's counterproductive to our ultimate goal of helping kids become biliterate.
Right. Right. Yellow is something that we should start doing.
Okay, yellow, even if you're teaching in an English medium classroom, start including books in non-English languages. This is actually very good for English-speaking kids too. There's several studies in Canada that have been done with preschool programs that show that English-speaking kids take an interest in Arabic when there are Arabic books in the classroom. And so this is something that, we need to worry about bilingualism for our nation as a whole, including monolingual English-speaking kids.
Right.
So start making sure that your your classroom libraries are include non-English languages and represent the languages that are spoken in your classroom.
And a green light, something we should keep doing.
Keep on working hard. I know people are going to do it anyway. I don't need to tell them, but keep on loving kids. Keep on trying to get better, which I know that all teachers do anyway. And we're never going to get there. We're always in a state of becoming, but keep on learning, keep on trying.
Well, I'm so inspired to keep on trying, to keep on learning from a leader from a leader, from a guru, from a living master like
Oh,
you,
thank
Dr.
you.
Escamilla. So we'll have to have you back to talk about teaching English to reading to
Okay.
teaching reading to English learners. So
Okay.
thank you again
Uh-huh.
for your time.
My pleasure.